Welcome to Season 3 of Curious Roots. I'm your host, Michelle McCrary, writer, community archivist, public researcher, and descendant of the community of Harris Neck, Georgia. I also like to think of myself as a truth storian. Shout out to Sterling Harjo for that one. Hopefully you're back here because you've listened to Seasons 1 and 2 of the podcast. If you haven't, please go back and listen and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. The dawn of the Sweetgrass era coincided with the Works Progress Administration's sponsored folklore collection in the Sea Islands of South Carolina and Georgia. Writers, amanuenses, and intellectuals arrived in the region to collect folklore from Black communities whose culture, scholars feared, was at risk of being washed away by a tide of modernity. Among this group was William Bascom, a mentee of the scholar of early African American studies, Melville Herskovits. With Herskovitz's imprimatur, Bascom visited the Sea Islands to ferret out folklore and procure material culture from Gullah communities. As was typical of the collecting interests of anthropologists at the time, the old was in and the new was out. Although sweetgrass baskets had become popular, Bascom was primarily interested in collecting fanner baskets that, by the 1930s, had become alluring artifacts of slavery. He was partially motivated by the questions about the extent to which West African social and agricultural practices had survived in the Americas, and he believed that wooden spoons, canes, and coiled baskets held the answer. Although perhaps more systematic in his research than the WPA workers who consulted his expertise, Bascom nonetheless probably saw himself on a rescue mission to save a vanishing culture. Season 1 retold the story of the destruction and taking of Harris Neck through eminent domain, while Season 2 featured interviews with descendants and community members still fighting to right the wrong done on July of 1942. For Season 3, we're still looking at Harris Neck, but this time with a focus on what life looked like before July 1942. The passage I read at the top of the show was from an article by Molly Robinson called The Tide is Turning, Gullah Vernacular Knowledge and the Ecologies of Low-Country Basket Making, from the spring 2022 edition of the Journal of the Association of Historians of American Art. The article features an interview with William Bascom and my second great-grandfather, Isaac Basin Jr. It turns out that Bascom interviewed my second great-grandfather in June of 1939, about 3 years before the U.S. government would declare eminent domain and destroy the Harris Neck community forever. Thanks to Molly Robinson's research, I was able to access William R. Bascom's notes from his time working for the Federal Writers Project in Georgia, and more information about my grandfather, his process of basket making, how he learned basket making, and a host of other fascinating things about Harris Neck pre-removal. If it weren't for the Works Progress Administration, this important cultural information would have been largely lost to me. And if it wasn't for the research of Molly Robinson and her excellent footnotes, I would not have been able to track down William R. Bascom's notes and his interview with my second great-grandfather.
Musicians and singers, too, found employment in orchestral and vocal groups. These art singers, organized and directed by William Lawrence, have successfully presented a great many programs of classical music. In pride of river fields are gay, of birds sweet, oh, make your wood have all things should, with joy within the spring, la 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 la.
The Works Progress Administration was part of a New Deal program that ran from 1935 to 1943. It mainly employed men to carry out public works projects like buildings, bridges, and roads. Another part of this administration was the Federal Project Number 1, which employed musicians, artists, and writers. The project employed more than 5,000 artists at its peak in 1936 and probably double that number over the 8 years of its existence. It produced 2,566 murals, more than 100,000 easel paintings, about 17,700 sculptures, and nearly 300,000 fine prints, and about 22,000 plates for the Index of American Design, along with innumerable posters and objects of craft. As Molly Robinson mentions in her article, Bascom was among the many researchers who were a part of this program. Much of his interview work was published in the Georgia Federal Writers Project collection, Drums and Shadows. Over the next 5 episodes, I'll be sharing more about Bascom's work and what it reveals about life in Harris Neck pre-removal. I'll also be sharing my experience navigating access to research like Bascom's as a public researcher and community archivist who is unaffiliated with an academic institution. I'll also talk about how that complicates my ability to access important historical information and opens the door to larger questions about who has access to information about their own culture and ancestry. I hope you'll join me for those episodes in the coming weeks. Learn more about Black coastal communities from North Carolina to Florida at GullaGeechee-Corridor.org. Find out how you can support the land return efforts at Harris Neck at harrisnecklandtrust.org. For even more resources about Black coastal communities, check out CuriousRootsPod.com and follow us at CuriousRootsPod on Instagram. Curious Roots is executive produced by me, Michelle McCrary, Moonshadow Productions, and DayClean Communications. Music and additional co-production is by Juan Pablo Piedrahita.